Shop Talk, I'd like to share with you the difference between a dull chisel and a sharp chisel. Come with me today as we discover the difference between some dull chisels to some refined chisels. Many of you may have started out with a chisel, better known as a screwdriver, and a big hammer. How many of us have chiseled out, some wood needed for maybe a hinge using nothing more than these two tools? Well, after a bit you may say, there's got to be a better way. So you go down to your local hardware store and you buy some cheap chisels and, and they work pretty good. The problem is, how do you sharpen them? Because after you use them from the store, they'll eventually get dull. So what I did is I have a little belt sander here, and I would take my belt sander and safety glasses always. Well, a couple of problems with that. One, it still leaves it pretty rough. Oh, it's sharper than it was. But if you feel it, it has a lot of edges on it and you can quickly burn it. Let me show you a better way that I learned from the true professionals. While you can use a belt sander, let me show you a different way and what I believe is truly a better way. Come walk with me to my grinder. This is a low-speed Rikon grinder. And the reason I went with it, there are some other models that are water bath that goes slow and keeps your blade cool. That's part of what you want to do, is to ensure that your blade doesn't overheat. And so it's important that you have some water and your grinder set at an angle where you can just barely start working your blade across. I'll show you what I mean. Here I'm just wanting to get a slight angle on it. It's important that you keep the chisel cool. You can almost feel, in fact you can feel the heat start to build in the chisel. The moment you overheat it and it turns dark, you've got to start over and grind all of that heated metal out. The other thing that this does is it puts a bit of a concave into your chisel so that when you go back to the next step, you're not sharpening the entire edge. So instead of a belt grinder, I like using the low-speed grinder, but that's just the beginning. Now that I've created the concave part of the grind, the next thing you must do is flatten the back. There's a couple of ways that you can flatten the back. You can take a piece of glass, put sandpaper on it. This is 220 sandpaper. I got it wet, but you can use that and you can flatten the back of your chisel. What I like even better is to take, this is just a whetstone, a diamond whetstone, add a little bit of water, and then you can simply hold the chisel flat, and you just want to get that back of your chisel, it has to be perfectly flat. And you'll know when it gets flat if you start with a sandpaper and then you move to something like this diamond stone. You know it's getting there when all of the marks are very consistent, and you will actually get it where it's polished like glass, very, very shiny metal. And then at that point, you know it's ready to go to the next phase. This is a flattening stone. It's very, very flat. Part of the price that you pay is to ensure that it's very, very flat. It has just some very fine diamond dust. And then in order to flatten water stones, these are Japanese water stones that I like because you don't have to keep them immersed in water versus some of the other stones you do. Take a pencil and you just simply mark it up. And then I like to use a little bit of running water, wet my flattening stone, take my stone and simply rub it together until all of the marks, and you can see there that it's flat here, but there's a little bit of a dip. So you keep flattening it until all of the marks are gone. Now I like to do both sides. That way you're ensured that your stones are completely flat. Once we flatten the stones, the next challenge is how do you get that precise bevel in the chisel? We've already flattened the back, and now we want to get that bevel in. And you can in fact do it by hand using a coarse stone. This is a 1,000 grit stone. You can do it by hand, or you can use a chisel guide. I like a chisel guide because then every time I set it in there, it's set for the same dimension or the same bevel. To put your chisel in your guide, you want to set it for 1 and 5/30 seconds for a 30-degree bevel using this particular guide. So when you set your guide and your chisel down to the stone, it gives you the result of a 30 degrees. So once I set it in the guide, I want to make sure that the back is very polished, and I'll use a wet stone, in this case the diamond stone, and I will polish it until it's almost as crisp as a mirror. You can then use a refiner stone. This is 10,000, and I'll do the same thing for the back because you want your back perfectly flat. Now at this point, I'm going to transfer my grinding not to the diamond stone, but to my coarse stone, which allows me to take off more metal quickly. After I do the 1,000 grit stone, then I want to move it to the 10,000. I'll take a rag, wipe off the coarse material, and you can begin to see how the bevel is starting to come out. Again, keep your stones wet. Same process. And you can watch the water, and as it flows around the chisel to see if it's being consistent. And the markings in the stone will also show if you're putting equal pressure. I'm starting to get it shiny. I've got a little bit of dull here on the tips, so I'll keep sharpening until I get shiny all the way across. And if you really want to see it, then you take a magnifying glass and you can look at it to see if it's consistent all the way across. And until you get that same shiny, you want to keep working it. One last thing I would tell you is it's also important to ensure that your cut is square with your chisel. If it's angled, then it's going to not cut as well. So you want to square up the tip, make sure that everything is working just like it needs to. A square face, sharp, nice and even. And the difference is a dull chisel will gouge the wood, and what you'll see here in a moment, a sharp chisel will shave the wood like you're shaving hair off your face. It becomes razor sharp. I've sharpened the chisel now where I've got the nice bevel, 30-degree bevel. It's consistent almost to the very, very end. I would keep working it until it was consistent all the way in, but for today's demonstration, I think it shows a difference. So I take the guide off, and the last thing that I want to do, take a little water on my 10,000 stone, and I want to just flatten the bevel, or the back side of the bevel, just a little bit, very light pressure. And the reason is as you sharpen it, it creates a bit of a curve on your tip. And so by coming across the back again It makes sure that that back is very, very flat. And now this chisel is razor sharp. So when you compare, the screwdriver as a chisel to a cheap, just quickly buffed, with a grinder chisel, to one that is truly razor sharp, the difference is amazing. And as you can see, I can shave just the tiniest little piece. And if I'm working a dovetail or I'm trying to work something, a sharp chisel makes all the difference in the world. So what's the lesson? What's the shop talk? Well, there's a Proverbs 27:17, that reads, "As iron sharpens iron, so do one person sharpen another." Here's what I'd like for you to take away from today's shop talk. Who is sharpening you? You see, a dull chisel can be used with a lot of pressure, but it ends up damaging the wood. If you are a sharp chisel in the hands of a master, that sharp chisel can not damage the wood, but actually shave the wood to get the refined product. So the question I'd have to you is, who is in your life that's sharpening you? Do you have an accountability partner that will hold you to those areas of your life that you're struggling with? I've found in my own life that accountability partner is a good person to have in my areas that I've trusted them to help me to deal with a particular area. And I tell them, ask me 2 questions. The first question is, how did you do yesterday? Or how did you do last week? The second question I have them ask me is, did you just lie to me? Knowing that the second question is coming helps me to be honest with my accountability partner with the first question. So we all need accountability partners, a trusted friend, someone that will hold you accountable with those struggles in your life. How are you doing? And did you just lie to me? When we allow God to sharpen us through areas in our life, and often I find that it is in those difficult times, those times that are abrasive and challenging, it creates heat. When we go through those difficult times, it's as though God is sharpening our lives. He's sharpening those rough edges off of our lives. Because when we become a refined tool in the hands of our master, then he can use us even more. That's today's Shop Talk. Join me next time as we'll look at the defects in wood and how those defects truly can add beauty in a project. Thank you much.